Welcome back. Well, his platform is out, but there's been no corresponding bump in the polls so far. Some of those polls place the NDP near the Green Party in popularity. I had NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh to join the show for a session-ending interview last week to discuss his rebound strategy. Here's what he had to say. And NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh joins me in the studio. Nice to have you for right out to the campaign all summer long.
Good to see you, Don.
You blew me away with that announcement of a platform in the last few weeks. You got pharmacare, dental, vision, hearing, mental health issues on top of a big housing plan. You know that we can't afford that, right?
I think we can't afford not to do it. I mean, we live in a wealthy country where there's so many Canadians who cannot find a place to live. That's just wrong. We can solve that if we make it a priority. We have a healthcare system that we're really proud of, but hasn't kept up with the needs. And we don't have to accept that. We see billions of dollars that offshore tax havens are sheltering, that corporations are hiding and not paying what they owe to Canada. We know that's in the multi-billion dollars, more than enough to cover the plans that we're talking about. We would make different choices and make sure those who can, the wealthiest, the richest corporations, the richest of the top 1%, that they contribute their fair share, and we can actually make these programs a reality. We can deliver pharmacare for all, healthcare that includes dental care and vision care and hearing care. We can do that.
Now, that's not aspirational. That's a promise, is it?
It is a promise.
In the first mandate of an NDP government?
We're starting with pharmacare, which is fully costed, and we've talked exactly about how we can afford it and how it's going to save us money, because we know of so many cases where people who don't have access to medication because they can't afford it. Millions of Canadians skip medication because they have to pay for their groceries, don't take the medication they need, end up in the emergency room, and that's very costly on our healthcare system. Let's save people by giving them the means to manage their illness or cure themselves, and we can do that.
And you're going to run this through the Parliamentary Budget Office, are you, before you release the final
We are, yeah. But we're lucky with the pharmacare plan that the Parliamentary Budget Office already looked at the cost, looked at how much we spend as a federal government and how much we spend provincially and then individually and then employers, and looked at the cost and found that we would save money. Save $4 billion a year if we actually move to a universal system.
You're firmly opposed to more pipelines. You've even extended that opposition to the LNG super project in BC. And I'm curious, are you prepared to accept the economic consequences of that opposition, even knowing that the world will continue to get fossil fuels from somewhere, even if it's less clean sources of energy?
Well, I think we should be clear. BC has a plan, and they're trying to work, and they're going to make sure their plans fit within their reduction of emissions. The federal government doesn't have a plan, and so I'm opposed to the federal government moving ahead with a project that is not incorporated into a plan that risks our coastal communities, that risks marine diversity, that's still opposed by Indigenous communities. That's what I'm very firmly opposed to. So Trans Mountain is something I'm against. I think when it comes to our energy future, we need to make sure we prioritize a couple of key elements. One, are we making plans that fit within our vision and our plans to reduce emissions? So does it fit within our climate change plan? Secondly, does it create jobs in Canada? If it's just a rip and ship approach where we export raw goods, that's not going to develop a robust economy. So it's got to create jobs in Canada, and it has to respect Indigenous rights. If it does these three things, those are projects that we can look at. If it doesn't, we can't move ahead with those.
I'm curious what you think. The Conservatives support this, and actually the Greens as well, so you've kind of got the whole gamut here. But the idea of cutting off imports of, say, Saudi and Venezuelan oil to our East Coast terminals and forcing the country to rely on our resources domestically.
Well, the idea of refining and having refining capacity in Canada would create jobs in Canada. That's a good idea. The problem with some of these plans is that they would require projects that have not received the support of communities, that do not meet the regulations environmentally. So Energy East is something that I'm opposed to. It's not a project that satisfies the concerns, doesn't fit within a plan, it doesn't address environmental concerns. But BC, for example, has a plan, and that's something that's very different from other projects.
I know you're in favor of the carbon pricing scheme that's at least in place, and perhaps even going beyond that, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, it needs to. I'm curious, are you still committed to Paris, and how do you close the gap between the Paris Accord targets and what the Parliamentary Budget Officer says is still a pretty big gap of like 80 to 100 megatons? How does the NDP put forward emissions reduction policies to make that gap go away?
Well, the first thing is that it's not enough to just have a price on pollution. We absolutely support a price on pollution. It costs us. We see the cost when it comes to forest fires and flooding and soaring temperatures. We know there's a cost. It hurts families. But the cost should not be borne on families alone. I mean, that's unfair that the Liberals propose a plan that puts all the burden on families, exempts the biggest polluters. That's not the way to go. So what we would do is make sure the biggest polluters pay their fair share, which would make the price on pollution more effective. So we reduce emissions by making sure the biggest polluters pay. But we know we've got to go beyond that. And that's why we've got a plan for public transport, electrifying that public transport, having a grid that runs east-west to connect provinces that don't have renewable energy with provinces that do, like Manitoba and Quebec. There's a lot we can do beyond just a price on pollution. That's why we're proposing our Power to Change, our new deal that tackles climate change and creates jobs, because we've got to create thousands of jobs if we want to tackle climate change.
Do you ever get down with the polls? I mean, you ran, you took a big gamble and a big change in your life to run for a seat, and yet last polls I see put the NDP almost on par with the Greens. Does that bother you?
I'm not worried about those type of polls, because I know the only poll that really counts is going to be on the election day in October.
Never heard that cliche before, but go ahead.
I mean, that's what I really believe. It's going to come down to the election day. And more importantly, I really believe we've got a plan that responds to what people need. People are worried about housing, and they believe New Democrats will solve that housing problem. People are worried about healthcare. People also believe that New Democrats will solve that healthcare problem with our pharmacare plan. And when it comes to the environment, people are worried that they're going to be left out or left behind. Workers are nervous about what a transition means. Right. But those folks know that New Democrats will never leave any community behind. And I'm confident people will see in us the champions that they need to move forward to a bright future.
Let's see what happens. It's going to be a really interesting 4 months. Jagmeet Singh, thanks for joining us. We hope to see you on the campaign trail.
Thank you very much.
All right.